Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 326. Welcome back to my co-host, Jordan Tyra. How are we doing, Jordan?
Good, thank you. Good to be back as always.
After some technical issues,
Yeah,
everyone can now hear Jordan, which is good. Always a good
yeah.
start. We are joined today by Gary Daly. Gary is representing today. He's representing basically three people and a company. So no pressure, Gary.
No pressure.
Um, yeah, we'll get into that in a second. But Gary, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys. Pleasure.
We'll get into your background to start with, mate, and then what we'll do is we'll go into the business, what you guys do, and who you work with as well. So, do you want to kick us off with a bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, so obviously my background always has been in soccer or football. I call it football for the podcast. I'm obviously based in Ireland, just outside of Dublin. So sometimes I might say soccer, sometimes I might say football. So I don't want to offend anyone with that.
We'll let you
Um,
off with that. We'll let you off.
yeah. But my background, like I said, it's always been in football, played at amateur level and whatnot, and actually started coaching quite young. So probably started coaching around the age of 16 with our other co-founder. So it's Gary, he's a Gary as well, and then Morgan. We're kind of the three co-founders of Training One to One. But would have started coaching with him around the age of 16. And again, I'm turning the big 30 this year, which I'm looking forward to or not looking forward to. We'll see when it hits. But over them kind of years I've been coaching, it's been every level. It's been starting with nursery, like literally 4 or 5 year olds, all the way up to working with professional players, senior players, and everything in between. So broadly, that's kind of my background from a coaching side of things. And like that, I've worked at most levels in terms of schoolboy or grassroots, and then up to kind of what you would call like elite League of Ireland.
So, was the business was it quite organic then that the business was created from all of your? Because obviously you're not touched on the guy's background, but I'm guessing it is similar in terms of coaching experience. But then was that a case of all coming together, realizing that there's something you can work on in terms of a business, and then setting it up and then just getting going?
Yeah, so like I said, myself and Gary would be same age in school, so best mates, and then Morgan would be Gary's brother, so he's a couple of years younger. We've obviously all been involved in football and whatnot for our lives, but it actually came about. So Morgan would have played at quite a high level at like schoolboy. So but he also actually had a lot of injuries to it growing. So it's funny. There's actually a picture of us at do you ever hear the Milk Cup up in
Yeah.
Belfast? We used to go up and watch that, and we went one year, and he was the picture, I'm like arm over his shoulder, exact same height, and then the exact same picture placed the next year. He's like 6'1", like it's crazy. But anyway, with that, as you guys would know, a lot of injuries kind of came and all that kind of stuff. So while he was out, I think he was in what we'd call transition year back in Ireland. It's kind of, I know school is obviously different, but it's kind of a year where people, go and try new things. Your schoolwork isn't as important for that year, let's say. And while he was injured, he just started trying to take sessions and that's kind of how he got into coaching. Like I said, myself and Gary would be from a team background coaching wise originally. So he kind of was with local players just doing one-on-one small group sessions, more so to keep him tipping over mentally while injured. And then like that, he got back playing. He finished off school. Myself and the other Gary were in college. And it was only a couple of years after I had just finished uni and Morgan was kind of coming into probably his last year. And I actually sent him a message to foot. We actually joke about it. I literally text saying, "Are you still doing that one-to-one thing?" And then it's kind of since then myself, himself, and Gary, obviously we kind of brought it together. Then from there, like that, Morgan kind of was doing it for that kind of year or two. Then probably parked it while he was finishing off school, and then we three of us just came together, and that was kind of how it formed. And then it's grown ever since in loads of different ways. But that was the birth story of it.
No, that's tough. Well, I want to get into like what your sort of week looks like, who you're working with, and the sort of structure of the sessions, philosophy, and all that in a second. But just on that, when it was like created, like you've obviously set the business up, you've had this idea to work with players. We spoke about it before we started recording. There must be a big opportunity in Ireland, especially the area that you are, for a lot of players to come and see you for a business that you've now created to be born. So, like that gap in the market, was it a case of setting it up and then going out and seeing who's interested in it, or did you see that a lot of players actually want this, they need this support? Let's set something off the back of that.
Yeah, so it was set up obviously because we all had the interest in it. There was obviously the business development side of it as well that we saw potential in. I mentioned it to yourself before we started the call that football in Ireland, participation at underage, like schoolboy level, is through the roof. It's probably the highest participated sport. So you've got a lot of kids who might train once or twice a week with their team, and them or their parents want them to get a little bit of extra sessions in. So there's always been demand for it in that sense. Like once we kind of set up in a venue kind of just down the road from where we're all living, and the demand was at every age from 5, 6 year olds all the way up to like 17, 18 year olds. So we've always, once we set up, the demand kind of came in. And another thing in Ireland, and I've noticed again from working in like the underage League of Ireland system here, is people travel for football. Like again, I've worked in teams, and I know of other teams where there's players traveling over like an hour to training sessions and back 3 times a week at that kind of elite level. And people are willing to travel for a good environment and good coaching. So it's definitely been something that we've now, with our venues, strategically try to place them to hit certain kind of areas. So where we are is like west of Dublin. We've got a venue then in North Dublin in Blanchardstown. We're setting up another one beside the airport. So we've kind of got, there's again motorway basically around Dublin that we're trying to hit that kind of belt of. Then we've got another venue up in Drogheda. So we're trying to set up venues where we tend to get a lot of demand from. And it was like that from the start, really. People were willing to travel for the sessions.
No, it's really interesting. When you say setting up venues and locations, are you meaning basing it from a pitch facility? Like, what's
Yeah,
actually
so
involved in that?
Yeah, so pretty much our first venue, the one in Selbridge, which we're still there 3 days a week, and to this day is like an Astro Park. So there's like 12 five-a-side pitches. We rent 2 of them on a Tuesday and then 1 of them on a Wednesday and a Friday, and then we'll stay on it for about 3 hours on them days. So from 6 to 9 p.m. So again, that was literally it. We went in, obviously got set up in there, and then over the years we've obviously taken more hours in the venues. A big thing we try to do, it's a big issue in Ireland, is facilities that clubs have. And it's one thing we're kind of self-conscious of, is not going into a club facility all the time. The main reason for that is I can think if I was in a club and then this private company was coming in renting a pitch, and I'm being told now I have less pitch space than I already had, you could get a bit of friction with that. So generally we set up in them kind of Astro Parks. So the Selbridge venue is an Astro Park. The one in North Dublin, the 2, sorry, that are going to be in North Dublin are like private facilities. The only club pitch we ever use is on a weekend when there's no games going ahead. It's at like 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So, but yeah, generally just reached out to these venues and kind of got set up, and then a lot of kind of advertising and whatnot to bring the players to the venue.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. It's really interesting to hear about the business side of things. And I know some listeners might be interested in that, some might not, but I'm going to speak for Jordan here. I think we are, because it's something that we've obviously gone to do in a slightly different way, because obviously it's working more strength and conditioning. But I think there's definite crossovers and lessons to be learned in terms of having an idea and then developing the business off the back of that. Jordan, have you got anything for that?
Yeah, I think 100%. I was going to agree with what Gary was saying there in terms of the first point, that players, if you can set up an environment of good coaching, that players feel trusted, and they trust the coaches and all that sort of stuff, players are willing to travel. And I think that's a credit to yourself, Gary, that clearly you have created that environment that players are willing to travel. I've had similar as well with, I've got a lad who lives in central London, getting a train 3 times a week down to Bournemouth to come and train, because if the environment's right and you can create that environment, players will travel. And I think that's a really important point to remember for anyone potentially looking at setting up something, because sometimes you're trying to pitch where you're going to set up a facility or a location to work from, and it's like, oh, it's not quite right there. Is it not quite right there? But again, if you get it right, players will come to you. And I think that's an important point to remember. But I know from also doing similar thing in terms of this country and renting power leagues pitches, renting goals pitches, and trying to get players working one-to-one in there, how frustrating that can be. So I think my question for you, Gary, is going to be, what was there friction with power leagues or whatever the equivalent is in Ireland, in terms of, because they're a business as well, they're trying to make money. If they can get a full 5-a-side game going on, that's going to be more for them. If you as a company come in and go, can we block books sort of 3-4 hours for one-to-one stuff? Were they accommodating of that, or were they thinking, well, hang on, mate, we can make some more money from 5-a-side games or whatever it might be?
Yeah, do you know, I don't know if it's different across where you guys are, but the pitch rent is the same whether I have 10 people on it or 100 people on it. So it's that kind of flat rate. Now, obviously, there's off-peak rates and whatnot, which would be during the day, which wouldn't really apply to us. But the first venue I mentioned, like that has about 12 pitches, and I think the first day we got in on it was a Friday because it was never that busy on a Friday. Like there's also a team that rents the facility as well. So the Monday to Thursday it was quite busy. I think a Friday might have been our first day. We got in, they were happy enough because there was no one using it to give us the 3 hours. Then we're kind of trying to be strategic and when we try to get access to these venues, because you can imagine this time of the year they're booked to the max. But when you kind of come to that March, April and teams start moving back to grass pitches or people, whatever it might be, that's kind of when we would try to get into venues. And I'm fairly sure that's what we done with the first venue. We would have came to them and went, what's the availability like on a Wednesday? And they'll go from March. It's yours pretty much. And then once you're there every week, not cancelling, they're not going to get rid of you as a business realistically. Like, and then they're looking for you. If you add another day, they want to be part of that as well, nearly. So that's kind of ours. It's been stepwise. Timing is important, I think, in terms of setting up a venue. That's what, like I mentioned, we're setting another North Dublin one up. It's in March. Obviously, it's another private venue. Like it's not a team's Astro pitch. And this one's only got a couple of Astro pitches there, but you're timing it where there's less likely to be teams there. And then you're guaranteeing yearly income for them because we only break with our group sessions for 2 weeks at Christmas, really, and then bank holidays, depending on if a venue's on a Monday. But that was probably a big one, I think, is gradually increasing the hours in venues and like that, showing the value you can give to them, which is, if anyone is in our industry of your small group and your one-to-one stuff, is if you cancel last minute and things like that, it can be bad for your business. And what I mean by that is, if I owned one of these facilities and I was rented out to one of you guys and 3 or 4 times in the last couple of months you've cancelled last minute and I can't replace that revenue, that's a big issue for these businesses, because they are businesses at the end of the day. So sometimes you might have to take a hit where if you cancel something late, you might just have to incur that cost for the sake of your reputation. Especially in Ireland football wise, it's such a small circle, because it's naturally a small country, and your reputation or your name is everything. That's why every interaction you have is so important. And we obviously in our environment try to make it as positive and challenging as we can for players, so that they obviously like the environment and want to come back. And then word of mouth is important. And like that, it's not just for the players, it's for venues, it's for whatever. You don't want to be the company who gets a bad name for cancelling last minute, not paying on time, all these little things, because that can just give you a lot of friction in the future.
I think you've raised a really valid point there as well, which I certainly see in this country, down here in the south of England as well. The country, well, we suffer, I believe, from a real lack of good quality pitches. You look at the continent, you go to Europe and you look at France, Belgium, Netherlands is definitely one as well. Germany, if you just take a bit of time traveling across the country, and I've been fortunate to go on, foreign tours with clubs and stuff. There's 3Gs, there's domes, there's indoor good football facilities like quite regularly around the country. Whereas I found certainly down here, maybe the same in the northwest for you, Ben, trying to get hold of good pitch space is actually really, really difficult at times. And like you say, throughout the winter, like you're saying, Gary, they're fully booked up because there's a number of clubs, even professional outfits, they can't train, pitches are frozen or whatever it might be. Can they get into an indoor facility? And there's a real lack of it. So I think what you said there in terms of some businesses who own those facilities can be sometimes a bit funny about actually getting people on. I don't quite understand that, because if it's empty during the day, like you say, and a company like yourself or ourselves come along and say, can we rent that from sort of 1 to 2? And they're a bit funny about it. Like, no, because we've got to keep it free for X, Y, Z. It's kind of like, well, hang on, we're guaranteeing you income here, and these pitches are few and far between anyway. Like, this is gold dust. So I think it's a big issue. Do you see that in Ireland at all? Is it a real scramble? Because at the minute 3G gets built in this country, it's booked up by teams, grassroots teams, everything for months, even years ahead in advance.
Yeah, like echoes what's going on here. Really, facilities. It's been really, really poor in Ireland, particularly the football kind of side of things. Like most clubs, if they're lucky, have one Astro pitch, and they might have 30 teams, and you're training on an eighth of an Astro, which, again, it's better than nothing, but it's not best case scenario. And yeah, it's the same. If an Astro was to get built in an area that's like a council owned or whatever, it would be booked up well in advance. Like I said, most of the pitches are clubs in Ireland would still have grass pitches, so obviously during the winter they're gone. So and again, I always come back to that point of timing is really, really important. If you want to get access to a venue, can you time it find out what clubs are in there, see if you can find out when them clubs stop using Astro pitches and going back to their grass, and then you try get in there. I've very rarely, I've only had one or two venues where they've said that you can have it from March to September, but then we're giving it back to X club. I've only probably had that once or twice with potential venues, and we just found other ones. One, for example, is a school venue we have that they were more than delighted for us to come in because they knew we were guaranteeing, like I said, 50 weeks of income. If we cancel because of something with short notice, we have to incur the cost on that. Like I said, I think reputation is really important. For the sake of saving maybe 50 to 100 euro, isn't worth damaging your reputation of being always cancelling and things like that. So I just think it's to answer the question, it's the same over here. It's a scramble for Astro pitches, which we obviously need because of the current weather. We have a storm on the way for tomorrow, so the weather isn't helping either.
I love the fact that you brought up the whole reputation side of things as well, Gary, because I know you've mentioned there about football in Ireland and that sort of community being quite tight. And if your reputation slips, then obviously that can spread. But I think that's the same across football in general, like even across the world, across Europe. Like I think it's really important to really focus on that and keep your standards high, isn't it? And like you've mentioned there, from a business perspective, that's just operating at a real professional level that you say, listen, I booked it, it's getting cancelled, but I'll incur the cost because it's not your fault, it's not ours, but it's been on our side. So I think there's ways of operating as a business and a coach and a business owner. And I think that's a key lesson to take away from anyone. But even if you win with a club, that can still cross over to being at a club as well in terms of how you operate too, can't it?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think, like I said, reputation is massively important. We'll probably get on to, but we've about 10 coaches who coach for us in our venues or coach with us, because we wouldn't be on the pitch as much now. And again, anytime I sit down, I would generally do the interviewing process with the coaches. It's all on reputation. What I know of a coach, I've rejected coaches with A licenses, elite A licenses, because I've got trusted sources who can tell me things about the coach that I wouldn't like to have in our environment. So I think your reputation and your kind of manner and things like that, I know these are all kind of buzzwords that people use, but they definitely get you in the door. I think necessarily for me anyway, they get someone in the door more than having a shiny certificate of achieving a course or whatever it might be. I think like that reputation for me is everything at club, in what we do, because it's your currency really, because you're going to be judged. I know people say don't judge a book by the cover, but if I went in managing a team tomorrow, players in that dressing room would be asking people who I've previously coached, well, what's he like? That's just true of probably every industry really.
I think that's an important point you made again in the world of social media, where everything is glitz and glam and fancy and everything that you see online is always the best side of somebody. Still, regardless, word of mouth and reputation counts for more, doesn't it? You know, it is really, really powerful. Would you agree with that, Ben?
I think so, yeah, 100%. And I mean, these guys are, in terms of socials, we'll get onto that in a little bit.
Yeah.
To dive into that, because these guys are absolutely bossing it on the social side. But I think it's a really important point that, like, the perception of what people can perceive to be like on social media and what they're like in person is really important. But like what Gary mentioned, the way you operate on a daily basis, people see that and they'll talk. And you're exactly right. Like whether it's players or coaches, you get someone new coming in, they're going to ask what they're like. Some people are going to be having them, some people aren't. So it's just natural, isn't it? But I'm keen, so I want to try and get into, Gary, some of your philosophy and your approach to individual work with players, because it's something we've talked about quite a lot on the podcast. We obviously spoke more from a S&C perspective, why players are coming out to see private coaches. But I'd love to get your perspective on why you feel players are coming away from clubs and spending time with you, whether it is on an individual basis or a small group basis. What is the big focus for them?
Yeah, like again, I'll probably touch on their off season with the pros. A lot of them, they get their kind of maintenance program in terms of cardio stuff they need to do, and this is going to go back to facilities. Weirdly enough, some of them want a nice environment to do it in. Now, I don't necessarily mean like coming to us, but I mean, where are they going to do it? Are they just going to go to a local council grass pitch and do their 4-minute runs, whatever it might be? Like I've 30-40% of the guys who've been in, that's one of the reasons they've actually said is they like getting their runs done in. Again, we rent a nice, really nice Astro facility because it's during the morning, so it's always free. Nice clubhouse, private car park, away from, it's in Maynooth, but it's just outside the town. So it's in a real nice venue where they can come, park their car, the showers, nice changing room facility. So that's one of the reasons, and because they have certain runs that they have to do for their kind of off season period just to stay tipping over, or if some are returning from an injury, they might have kind of to do more harder runs kind of to get themselves back. But that's one reason definitely, is they have work to do anyway, and they're kind of like, why not just tailoring a little bit of football work to it, and then the football work comes in really specific chaseable goals. So again, a big thing we work on with the pros is like what would you call like awareness. So like check and shoulder scanning behavior. That's a big thing we do, obviously with any position, but mainly obviously your centre mid, centre halves are big ones we do that with. You've then got attacking players where it could just be chasing one specific goal scoring element that they want. If it's a winger, they might want to master a cut in finishing. That's what the sessions are. We've probably made every mistake in the book in terms of doing all the kind of fluff stuff that looks good on social media. Whereas now, if you were to come and look at one of the sessions, it kind of would look boring, if that makes sense. It would be a good warm up, and it would probably be into one exercise, maybe two, that chase one real specific thing. And it's kind of counterintuitive to how you would coach younger kids in groups and whatnot. It's just very specific to detail to chase that one kind of outcome. And like that, we've actually dealt with managers in clubs over your side of the country where they've actually reached out to us and said, "Oh, I see whoever is in working with you, and can you kind of tidy up this finish with them?" And so that's definitely something I've seen the last year that's actually improved, as clubs being a little bit more open to it. Again, there's social media perception kind of doesn't help the industry, but sometimes players will go to these trainers and will do mental kind of exercises that look, like I said, look good for the camera, look like they're working really hard, but they're kind of just doing a load of nonsense, really. They're just running around. Whereas, like I said, ours would be very, very tailored towards a specific outcome and like I said, the session can look really boring if you just looked at it. Now, Morgan's the social media wizard, so he makes it look great for the social media, the way he captures it. But if you were to come watch one of the 1 hour sessions, you wouldn't look at it and think there's anything groundbreaking. It's just repetition in a really targeted area for that player's position.
I was going to ask about that in terms of making that impact with a player. And I think I fully agree with you, by the way, in terms of some of the technical sessions that go on with players privately. I think sometimes it just crosses over into, can we make players tired? And what can we do to make the players tired within that session? But like what you've mentioned there, a lot of the time that isn't what you're trying to achieve, is it? If it's something on a technical basis, like you talked about a certain type of finish, or I don't know what it is in terms of anything technical, that doesn't break down to having a player in a fatigue state and doing loads of different drills. Like you say, you can get all different camera angles and all the rest of it. How much of that is actually going to have an impact on when they're playing at the weekend? It's not really, is it?
No, yeah, that's what I mean. It's being real specific and targeted with what you're chase detail. Again, attackers are the easiest examples to pull, but you pick an attacker, you look at where they get their shot chart from Y Scout. You find that they get a lot of opportunities, maybe in the 6 yard box, one touch that they're missing. There's an easy goal to chase, and you just get reps in of that. Like I said, the scanning stuff is a big one of what we do, because again, I know from team coaching, it's something that's hard to address if you're managing a group of players. Whereas when we're working with lads in groups 2, 3, and 4, we can go really specific. Like a big one for me, I would do a lot with centre halves in the off season, is if you imagine a centre half to centre half pass in a game. Modern football now, it's all about one of the key pressing kind of functions. Liverpool kind of made it really popular recently, is that like out to in press from the wingers. How many centre halves get caught on that square pass where they get pinched, and it's just an awareness thing. And again, you'll talk to players and they'll say, "Geez, I've never been told that, or I've never had it explained to me." And that's not a criticism of clubs. Like I said, clubs are under really tough circumstances. They've got to get results if it's first team level, and they're obviously working with teams of 26, like big squads. So it's very hard to then pick apart these little things. That's why I think individual coaches are becoming more prominent in clubs. Things like IDPs and really specific things. And like I said, that centre half example is a good one, because that might happen to you once a season, but that's one goal you've prevented. And I think that's so important. You chase them details, it is important. Like you said, not just training to get somebody tired. The lads have their own runs to do anyway, that to keep themselves tipping over. Ours are very much like obviously they get warm and then the sessions will be quite low tempo at times, to be honest. Obviously, unless sometimes they get a bit excited when they're doing finish and they want to go again, and you nearly need to control them in that way because they're footballers. They want to play football. They don't mind. They like kind of that hustle of getting tired, even though it might not be best for them at that time.
No, I fully agree. And I think that the level of detail that you're applying to that session, it then crosses over, Jordan, doesn't it? That when we get players coming in on an individual basis and someone like Gary has pointed out that, okay, this is the body position that we're trying to work on or whatever it is, and this is the movement maybe we're struggling with from an S&C perspective, that then makes it quite targeted in terms of what we're trying to develop in the gym then, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Apologies if you can hear the rain in the background. It's chucking it down here at the unit. But
it's always sunny down there, John.
Yeah, no, not always. Don't believe everything you hear. No, it's absolutely chucking it down. But no, sorry about that. But no, I agree with everything that's just been said, to be honest. And I could blow my lid on this a little bit because going back to what you were saying, Gary, like there's just so much fluff on the internet now. Anyone can run a session, make a lad tired, or and then make it look good for Instagram. But players aren't stupid, are they? The players want what they want. They're coming to you for a reason. And I think the biggest thing for me, is I just wanted to make this point, was, are you running that session for the player, or are you running that session for you and trying to make it look good and then put it online? Because if it's the latter, you're not doing it for the right reasons, is my honest opinion. And that, like you said, Ben, that crosses over into S&C as well. And like Gary was saying, off season's a massive one. We had a lot of the players that come into us over the off season, because you're right, they get given their programs, and the option is go and find a random park that's probably covered in dog poo and all this sort of stuff to try and get some runs done, or come in to an environment that's set up for athletes and you can be overseen by a coach who knows what they're talking about. And it's just facilitating that program, really. You're not trying to add any sort of extra into that. You're not going, well, I've got an agenda and I want to get this out of them. It's listening to what the player wants. Bang on. If you get a player coming to you saying, I'm struggling with my cutback finishes, first time cutback finish, whatever it might be, even from an S&C point of view or an off-season conditioning point of view, I think it's really important that you incorporate that into your sessions somehow. And you go, right, if you've got a player coming to you with a specific need, that's priority number one. Priority number two will be, well, actually, are we keeping them fit, strong, powerful, so that when they go back to the club in pre-season, they're ready? Fine. But there should never really be at any point in that the priority being, I'm going to get some good content and film this and make them look like they're working really hard. I think that's an important point to make in this day and age, because you see so much online, don't you? And it's same again on pitch, in gym. It's the same thing. Are we training a player to be tired and look like they're doing some really cool, fancy stuff, or are they actually doing some good stuff? And I bet you're the same, Gary. Do you do a session that was like stellar and you think, what a great session, and then at the end you go, didn't film any of that. That could have been some good content to put out.
Yeah, like social media is an interesting one, because we've definitely told the line with it across the years in terms of what we've put up that looks great, because obviously we're trying to grow socials, and that's like why posts can be quite targeted. We try to be real careful nowadays with what we post, to try to be really kind of professional and show what real work is. But yeah, I definitely agree. Social media is just such a weird, and it's so powerful in terms of what it can give you as a business in terms of opportunities. But like that, there's also the damage you can do to your own industry by putting up fluff, for example. I think, to come back on something you mentioned there, and I also mentioned on the environment, the players, it's so important that the guys are given programs to do, and some of them, again, they can be lonely for that summer period where they come home. A couple of their mates could be working 9-to-5 jobs, so they're just sitting around all day, and they're going to go to a gym and run on a treadmill. Whereas, like I said, the environment we provide, I could be working with 2 centre backs, Morgan could be working with 2 or 3 attacking players, Aaron, one of our other coaches, could be working with a player, and all of a sudden, when they all finish their session, there's a group of 5 or 6 of them who have runs to do, and it's kind of like it's like a little running club they get going then. So there is that community element, which is great. But yeah, back to the social media is just so interesting, because, like I said, you can show what a good session looks like, and then it doesn't get the clicks, but you're probably doing the right thing by showing what real work is. It's definitely a line we kind of toe a little bit. Morgan would speak to the social media a lot better than me. That's kind of our whole business model. He would run all the social media side. I'd run all the kind of football curriculum side of things, and then like I mentioned, the other Gary, he would be very big on like the operational. He's kind of, we call him the brain behind the operations. Me and Morgan just try to spend all the money on new things, and Gary settles us down. He's quite good at that.
That's class. Gary, in terms of your experience working small group or individual now, what would any sort of advice be? Because obviously the level of detail you can put in when you've got one player in front of you coming with a specific want or need from a coach, or whether it's from them, they say, I want to work on this, I want to improve on this. If you were to step back into club environment or speak to club coaches now, would there be anything you'd say in terms of advice, working individually, applying that to a team setting, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think a big thing in any team I've been part of when I came in as I would have been like a coach with League of Ireland underage teams, which would be like the elite schoolboy level here. I would come in as like a third or fourth coach, and the manager at the time who I still work with now in club football, he would have been big on having a lot of staff, or as many staff as you can because it allows that kind of unit work. Or we kind of had unit coaches, which is a great way to go. Obviously, really professional clubs now will have unit coaches, IDP coaches, all that kind of stuff. But if I'm talking to somebody who doesn't have access to all that, is trying to get as much staff as you can involved in, let's say, a team. So say I'm the manager, I would try to have at least a goalkeeping coach and maybe three other coaches, each designed to or designated a unit, so like a back four, midfield, and a front three coach. So that way, straight away, you're breaking down development from a squad of 20 into groups of like 6, 7, depending on obviously the size of the unit. And then from there, you can then go into the granular detail for individuals. I think that's important. I think managers and assistant managers, it's tough because you've got to worry about team tactical, the bus on the weekend, the parents if it's underage football, all them little things. I think bringing in staff and trusting them is so important, and giving them the kind of tools to, and your trust, I suppose, to go and work with players individually. Another thing with that, with picking staff, is I always would try to have like a young coach in the staff. So what I mean by that is someone who's kind of only maybe started on the coaching journey. Maybe they're just finishing up playing, or they're still playing and they want to get a bit of coaching in, because, well, first of all, they're naturally going to be really, really respected by the players, because the players can go to them because they know they still play. And another thing is having a young coach is they should challenge you. And what I mean by that is they'll ask a lot, like if you do an exercise, they'll go, just kind of want to know why you're doing that exercise. It keeps you accountable because you're not doing any fluff exercises then, like I said. I do definitely think in professional clubs, like I said, it's probably a lot better now with these individual development coaches at different age groups. But even at the more schoolboy level, or kind of that kind of level, I still think it's important. You can focus on individual development if you make your staff bigger, bring in staff that you trust, and kind of maybe give them a role of trying to have a conversation with. And like, people think individual work sometimes needs to be a 2-hour session chasing a specific goal. An individual session for a month could be just chatting to a player once a week and getting a feel for where they are. Like, again, it's a role I've gone into now with individual development with a club, and I've had conversations with every player. But sometimes the conversation can be enough. Some players want to work on it on the pitch. Some players want you to show video of it. And again, that's what individual coaching is. It's what does that player need. Another thing, I'm kind of gone on a tangent here, but even with some of the pros in the off season, you might do a warm up and you might want to go into a real detailed exercise, but they might go, do you mind if I do like a sharpener? Pros love these sharpeners, which I know as a coach is a fluff exercise, but how, and theoretically, or a researcher or someone on Twitter would probably give out saying that exercise is nonsense, but how can you argue against what the player wants in that moment? Like, if a player wants that feel good feeling of just bouncing the ball 50 times for 2 minutes and getting a bit of a sweat going and just feeling sharper, so to speak. I know they're not really sharper, but it's probably better that they feel that way rather than me as a coach going, no, that exercise is nonsense. Sometimes you got to service the player's needs at the end of the day. That's really important. And I have no problem doing that for a player. If it goes on social media and someone's criticized my drill choice and all this, that's fine. That's their opinion, but they don't have the context of what that player wanted in that moment was that feel good for two. Because players need that. They need to feel good. And if a nonsense exercise, so to speak, is what makes them feel good, then who are we to argue with them? Sometimes feel has gone out of sport, a big time, I find. Obviously data is everywhere and it's crazy, and it's in our social media, it's our insights, our posts. It's obviously you've GPS now, you've everything can be measured, but I'm still a bit old school in the sense that some things can't be, and that's one of them things, I think.
You're talking our language there, Gary. That's something we've discussed that a lot on recent episodes. Just to pick a couple of things up there, I think what you've mentioned there around conversations with players is really important. I remember doing an episode with Jake Simpson ages ago now, and he was actually talking about the opportunities that he takes within a training session. He was with a team to target players to try and catch up, and that probably sounds quite unimportant, but he was literally saying I had to get out early to set up the session, so it allowed me 10 minutes that if I then needed to target maybe a couple of players, it gave me that time to go and target them, because otherwise I'd have been setting the session up, the players were doing the warm-up, I've lost that opportunity. So I think that's a great point in terms of those conversations, like you mentioned. Doesn't need to be a 2-hour session. It can literally be a conversation a lot of the time with a player, especially, I'm guessing, especially on like the technical aspects of what you guys are doing. That could literally, it didn't have to be that they're in front of goal, doing finishing or whatever it is. It could just be that conversation at that time.
No, definitely. I think I saw Russell Martin mention it in an interview about that young boy they have, Dibbling, is that his name? Who was doing really well. He said in the dressing room, he's just sitting there on his phone, like, so, like, and that's some players are like that. They, like, if someone like that was coming to a one-on-one session with me, I probably wouldn't give them a lot of coach detail. I would probably put them in an exercise that gives them reps of what they want. And I might ask them why they do something a certain way to see if they have an interest in the conversation. But like that's what I mean. Football, it's still about feel at the end of the day. You've got these players who, like that example, he's clearly a player who's quite freeing in the way he plays. And I get the impression Cole Palmer's a little bit like that. And that's why they're great creative players at the end of the day. On the flip side, some attacking creative players could come in and be really detail driven and love their numbers and want their goals and assists to be this at the end of the year. And it all comes down to the individual. What does the individual need? That's a really important, though, you make on putting time across for conversation. Like, individual development can be a 5-minute, 10-minute conversation, picking someone's brain. And it comes back to the basic principles of being a good coach is your session organized and prepared on time, because that allows you that 5-10 minutes to pull one or two players to have conversations with them.
I also love the fact that you brought up about kind of meeting players where they're at, and that it doesn't fall directly in line with, well, your philosophy or what you actually have planned that day, but actually having the ability to adapt as a coach and say, oh, a player wants to do this. I have to kind of meet them where they're at to keep them on board. And it was, again, ages ago, I did a podcast with Darren Burgess. He was at Liverpool at the time. He was saying about one of the strikers at the club at the time wanted to do a run before games. He wanted to go out, and it was like a reasonable distance. I think it was
5K, wasn't it? 5K or 10K rate. It was a big run.
5K. Yeah, he went to the 5K before games. And instead of him saying, you don't do it, like, that's not what we do, Darren actually went with him, and he just used to kind of like keep him at a certain speed and just let him do it. And that's kind of the same thing, isn't it? It's saying, like, I'm not going to completely take it out, because he obviously feels good doing that and was very effective as a player. So you kind of meet them where they're at, don't you? And you say, you can keep that in, but let's try and monitor the speed, or just keep an eye on what they're actually doing.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I think football's losing it. Sometimes can lose its feel a bit, and it's, at the end of the day, it's that kind of sport. It always will be. It's where the best players are the best player. They sometimes know when to ignore what other people say in terms of whatever it might be, and kind of do what they feel necessary. I'd say that story would have a lot of S&C coaches twitching a little bit, a 5K before a game.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is it? And that's the reality. And I'm not saying many players are going to be doing that now, because they're not. But if a player does have something like that, that they swear by, they want to do, it's just worth thinking about, isn't it? In terms of not fighting, is it worth the fight? Or is it worth you actually being adaptable as a coach and saying, right, how can we come to a bit of a resolve this and both win?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree there. I think meeting the players where they are is so important. Because obviously we naturally, as coaches, we have our own preconceived biases of a player, of what we think about football. I always say this when I coach attacking players. Like, I was a left back, I never really scored much. I don't have the answers to how you score goals necessarily. I have a couple of tips. If I see a player, maybe they're trying to reverse the ball across the goal and they're not closing their hips, and the ball's ended up over Rowe's head, like, that's a coaching point I can make. But like I said, you've got to look at the player where they are and meet them there, because if I coached everyone the way I am, everyone would be a left back and my team would never score a goal, I don't think. Probably be all right keeping the ball and maybe defending, but a lot of nil-nils maybe.
I think that's important though, and it's not just individual players. I think sometimes the group of players as well, and even potentially coaches. And I think from a sports scientist perspective, I'm a big fan of rondos. Some coaches hate rondos, some sports scientists hate rondos, some really like them. But the reason I like rondos, for example, is the social side of it. And I'll always go back to my time at Lincoln. Tom Shaw, who's now first team coach at Lincoln, he came up with it. It was called Circle Man. And it was literally every Friday, all the players and all the staff were in a big rondo, and you voted for the worst three players. And the worst player of those three got a little trophy, and they kept it for the week. And then you do the same thing the Friday after. And it was the day before a match. And scientifically, is it really improving anything? Probably not. Technically, is it improving anything? Probably not. From a warm-up perspective, it's like, oh, it's a bit of a risk and change of direction. But at the end of the day, the buy-in was incredible. The players loved it. The coaches loved it. And it was like almost the high point of the week before the game. So everyone got up and you go, and that's nothing fancy. That is literally just a rondo. But the players loved it. And if you go in with, your preconceived, like, oh, we can't do rondos. We can't do this before the warm-up. We can't do this because it's going to X, Y, Z. Then all of a sudden you're demoralizing a squad. So not just one player, but an entire squad. And I think the point you made there in terms of meeting players at halfway or making sure they're feeling good about session, if it's just getting switched on, if it's alive and whatever you want to call it, it can apply to a whole squad as well, can't it?
No, yeah, absolutely. That's an important point you make, and I've definitely, I know your audience will be mainly probably S&C coaches. I've definitely seen that with S&C coaches where I've seen some come into a group and try change everything in one session. And again, players, particularly if they're older, you need to be clever in how you get buy-in from them. That's a great point you make. That exercise is obviously great for the culture and whatnot, but you could see some S&C coaches maybe going into an environment and going, no, I'm ripping, or heads of S&C, whatever it might be, ripping that up completely. And then you don't need to burn everything down in one day. It probably is the way of looking at it. You can make your gradual changes and get what best practice things you want in there. But again, what is high performance? Everyone says this word high performance. Is it fancy gyms? Is it the correct program? Is it the research paper? Or is it what works really well for that group of players or that context, whether it's a big group, small group, and whether it's what we do in terms of private sessions on the pitch, or you guys with the S&C stuff. It's high performance is very, very, very contextual, I would say. And that's why it's so important that if you're someone young coming into the space as a young coach, or like football or S&C coaches, is you've got to introduce yourself gradually. You got to make your changes gradually. Because if you go in and try to rip the whole place up, I've never seen someone last long in a place doing that. And that's a football coach or someone in the S&C space.
Yeah, that's a great point. Gary, in terms of people coming to, or players coming out to see you, do you tend to get a lot in a rehab phase? Are you getting a lot that are coming either that have just recovered from injuries that are then just before getting back to playing?
Yeah, we'd get a mix of that. So again, it could be maybe someone could be injured right now, and then they might get a couple of weeks to come back to Ireland while they're doing the rehab, and they might contact us for a couple of day sessions. There's definitely been loads of examples of that. Naturally, we in them cases we try to work quite closely with the physio or S&C coach to make sure that we have the exact program of what their load should be. We obviously have access to stats board vests as well, so we can track the GPS data and give it back to them. So we would be quite important that communication is there, so we know where the limits are with certain things. We'd obviously make sure their rehab program is carried out. To be honest, the players know what they need to do themselves. We're just kind of there while they're doing it, and then when they are allowed, obviously do a little bit of the football stuff. We try to keep it as position specific as possible. And then, like I said, just making sure the loading is really, really light and gradual. If they're there with us for maybe a couple of weeks, you might gradually build the intensity to whatever they're allowed to get to. I think that's an important part of rehab is, can you make the exercises as position specific as possible as they start the actual return to the football side of training. I know obviously your rehab, you'll have your rest phase, maybe your gym work, but when they're actually back out doing their straight runs and then they're getting into their more position specific elements, is can the exercise with the football, can you replicate what they're going to eventually want to do when they're back in full fitness? Good example is, again, with the team I'm working with now, is had a fullback who is only kind of back in from a back injury from the second half of last year. So he's only kind of doing all his runs. He's kind of done most of his straight line. He's now back in contact this week. But when he was building himself back up, I would pull him aside and work on him as a fullback, just dropping in gradually, receiving the ball, dribbling 5, 10 yards, checking the ball back to me as if I'm a centre half, because that's a movement he's going to naturally do. Obviously doing it at a low tempo, so he's getting a feel for his position. He's obviously getting the enjoyment of getting on a ball again and getting that eagerness back. And it's not like he's going straight from a random technical session where he's just kind of dribbling through poles or whatever. It's a bit more position focused. I think that's important where possible. And obviously, like I said, doing it load wise, doing it gradually to what they're allowed to do. It's really important that.
And obviously, in a rehab phase, the confidence of the player is really important as well, especially for like bigger injuries. So do you take that into account as well? That if a player has got injured doing a certain movement, are you looking to maybe incorporate that back in, build that confidence up with the player?
Definitely where possible, and where the player is comfortable with it. Naturally, when they get near the end stage of their rehab and their return to play, they're obviously going to be feeling a lot better themselves. But like you said, that kind of mental barrier of that movement that injured them, particularly obviously you see with ACL injuries, would be a big example, because it's obviously a lot of the change of direction or the planting. Yeah, it's just about gradually building that confidence up with them. And it all comes back to that transparency then. Is the player okay with what you're doing? Are you always in open dialogue with them, that they're feeling okay throughout the session? But definitely there is going to be a point that they have to cross that barrier of, I need to do this movement again. Obviously making sure you're doing it at the right time. But I think that's definitely important as well, and will be incorporated if and when possible.
John, have you got anything on sort of that, the individualization, the end of stage rehab side of things?
Yeah, I've got loads. I've got so it's been a great episode already. No, it's I think you've shown some really important points for the sports scientists and the strength and conditioning coaches listening. How important understanding the game is. Regardless of what level you've ever played at, you need to understand the game and the movements that they're going to go through and the confidence that players need to have in those movements when they're going back in. I personally do believe, this is my own opinion now, that a lot of sports scientists and strength and conditioning coaches, we're too gym happy. And not everyone, again, I'm painting a lot of people with the same brush here, but we're too gym happy, we're too research based. And like you said earlier, the feel has gone out of a lot of it. I do believe that as well. But I mean, I'm a little bit biased on this as well, because I started life as technical coach and then converted into sports science. So I personally believe that sports scientists should have that sort of minimal education on the movements that players have to go through. Because again, like you said, if you've got a player on a late stage rehab and you're going from, right, we've ticked off all the straight line runnings, we've got your maximal aerobic speed up to X, which is where it was before. But then you try and drop them back into a training session, and the fullback's a great example. You've not got them, dropping back in to try and receive a fullback, or having to really get wide quickly because it's gone into a goal kick, and then you're trying to get him out wide so the keeper can clip it into your feet or something. If you've done none of those movements, and then you're throwing them back into a random small-sided game, and they've got to suddenly try and replicate that again, it's going to be a bit more alien to them. So I think just that understanding of the movements of each position is, you have to have a bare minimum of that, in my opinion, as a sports scientist and a strength and conditioning coach. And it's not just about the numbers and the right. We've phased them through sort of 4K on the pitch. Now we're doing 6K on the pitch. We've got high speed running from this number to this number, sprint exposure from this number to this number. That's all well and good. But if that player doesn't feel confident to receive on a half turn or open a hip and go, switch the player to the other side, then you're doing them a disservice, in my opinion. So I think that's a really important point you've made there, Gary.
Yeah, I think on that as well, asking for help, it's a big one. Coach ego can be massive. We don't want people to know we don't know something and whatnot. But if again, you are an SSC coach maybe who doesn't have a lot of experience in the game, but you're really good at what you do, it could be as simple as, especially in big clubs with a lot of resources, just pull one of the football technical coaches and go, look, he's a fullback. I don't know exactly what important movements you need him to make. So can you show me? And go, right, well, I need him to get up the wing and whip the ball into the box. And you're like, right, well, I need to get him to that. Can I have it where he's not going as wide as possible? He's maybe doing that bit of width movement, getting on the ball, and rather than obviously whipping the ball into the box full pace, he's like doing that crossing motion, but into a little mini goal 15 yards away. And like that, ask the questions, ask for help. It's so important. Just drop your ego, ask for help. You don't know everything, and you're not meant to. Or else we'd all be Pep Guardiola maybe. But it's definitely really important that. And like you said, it's the movements. Like, the fullback's a great example. You could do all that gym rehab, all the runs and all, and then all of a sudden they're doing the non-contact bits of training, which might be just passing patterns and things like that. And then all of a sudden they're in full contact, 11v11. They're expected to run 40 yards, full pace, whip the ball into the box, and like really explosive movements in that position in particular. So can you replicate just so they're getting a feel for it, that when they go back into the full contact, it's not the first time they've crossed the ball across the face of the goal or hit a cutback cross. They've done it with you at a much lower intensity, of course, and a much lower, what would you say, like their ball contact on the ball. They're not doing a full match pace, but they're getting the feel is so important. And like I said, ask the questions if you need help with an exercise, because I've seen that before. You see it when players are coming back from injuries, and the clubs are putting up social medias of look who's nearly back, and generally they're doing the same thing. They're dribbling through poles and passing a ball into a mini goal 5 yards in front of them, which again, I don't know many positions that would do that, for example, but it's, and again, look, I might not know what stage of rehab they're at, and maybe they do a little bit more, but what we see is generally what I see then replicated. But it's, can you make it as position relevant as you can? If it's a midfielder, can you have them working on moving their body and checking their shoulders for opponents, because that's what they're going to have to do. If it's strikers, can you do close to the goal finishing while as part of the rehab? And again, players will enjoy the rehab a little bit more if they're getting a bit of their sauce, like they're getting a bit of what they actually are on the pitch to do in that rehab.
I think a key lesson for me, for coaches to take away, is spending time or listening to people like yourselves, Gary, because the way you speak and the level of detail you apply, even from the phrases that you use in the things that you're looking at on a technical perspective, straight away it certainly gets my brain thinking on, oh, if he wants to then develop that on the pitch with that player at that time, there's definitely things you can do away from the pitch and apply movements or testing out certain strengths and all the rest of it. So I think syncing up with coaches, whether you're at a club, making sure you spend time with the technical coaches, asking questions, probably asking more questions than what you're actually talking, using your ears a bit more than your mouth, and just listening to what they want. You listen to the language that they're using and some of the things that they're looking for from their players in the different positions. I think you can learn so much just from that alone. And if you are a private coach and you don't have time spending with people like yourselves, make it, form relationships, go out and seek people that are in the local area that do what you do, because there's more and more coaches now that do it. And I think you'll learn a hell of a lot from doing it. So I think in terms of notes, I'm running out of room on my paper, stuff I've taken away. So I think we've covered some really good stuff there, Gary. I really appreciate you coming on and applying that perspective on the technical side. But I think it's been great hearing how much actually crosses over to what we've spoken about recently, Jordan, as well, haven't we, on podcasts?
Yeah, there's so much crossover. There's so much crossover. Again, this is why we're seeing an explosion in rehab-based coaches now in the big clubs. You know, they are the halfway house between a technical coach and they are a strength and conditioning coach, because exactly what Gary's saying there, they've got to be ready to go back in. So, no, some great points. Got 100% agree. Really, really valuable for not just technical coaches there, but sports scientists and strength and conditioning coaches can take a lot away from that, Gary. So thank you for coming on, mate.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. It was good fun. Hopefully I didn't bore anyone too much.
No, not at all. We've referenced the socials, and you guys do a brilliant job. I know it's obviously probably Morgan's area of speciality in terms of getting in front of the camera and all the rest of it, but just give people the details on where they can check out some of the work that you do.
Yeah, so again, across pretty much any social, it's training and then 1-to-1. Yeah, you'll see us on a lot of them. That's probably the last point. I know we didn't probably touch on too much of the business stuff, but the big tip on anyone who's looking at this from a business point of view is whoever you're running your business with, is make sure you all have skill sets that you're happy enough for the other one to go and run away with. Like I said, Morgan's a whiz with social media. I don't even know what's going up on the post today, tomorrow, next week, because I just know that he's really good at that. And the same Brett with Gary is operationally, like I said, he's top class at what he does. And then hopefully the boys would say the same about me from a football point of view. But that's really important from a business point of view, I think, is bringing your skill set to the party, because without, let's say, the social media skill set, the one-to-one wouldn't be what it is, if that makes sense. So I think social media, or sorry, not sorry, the social media, I think bringing the skill set to your business is really, really important. And when you bring people into your business and give them a role, that's their role. It's not you to micromanage them to do their role. So it's really important that purely from a business development point of view, you hire somebody to do a job, let them do the job, and trust that process. Trust is really important there. But yeah, that was another little tangent for me. But yeah, training 1-to-1 across TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram. You'll find us somewhere. We're quite good at getting in people's faces, to be honest. So
Brilliant. There's loads of other stuff we could potentially jump into, Gary. So you're more than welcome to come back on, and the other guys as well, if you wanted to in the future. But no, I really appreciate you freeing up the time and coming on. So yeah, thanks a lot.
top class. Thanks, guys.
Jordan, there was a lot of points echoed in that episode, wasn't there, from recent podcasts? But what were some of the key things you took from it?
So much, loads. But I think the big thing is just how much crossover there is from a technical side, again, into a sports science, strength and conditioning side. And like I was trying to allude to, we as physical performance coaches, let's just bracket them into that. The performance work part of that is on the pitch, and it is about making sure they are performing on the pitch. So the physical bit, we can sort of look after. The performing bit, they need to be ready to perform. So when he's talking about, again, the rehab needs to replicate movements they're going to look in the game and all that sort of stuff, I think that's a point that can't be highlighted enough, in my opinion. And obviously we finished recording then, we just had a good chat about it. Love that point he's making about the feel's gone out of the game. And the story I was just telling there about working with some coaches recently, and they were saying, oh, do we do a 90-second small sided game, or is it 120-second, or is it, do we go somewhere in between? And it's like, it depends, because it might, the session, the intensity of that little drill might die after 60 seconds.
Yeah.
So, flogging a dead horse and doing it for double that time is probably not going to get much out of the players. So if you're seeing the session and the intensity is dying within 60 seconds, for example, I wouldn't go much more than that, because you can keep it really high and intense. So you can have all your set and rep prescriptions that you want, but at the same time, the feel needs to guide a session. And I think that's a really good point you made.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the other side of it was obviously coming back to like conversations, the conversations, reputation as a coach. So how you operate with players, how you're speaking to people, and all the rest of it, things that we've banged on about numerous times. I think that was really important. And then the other thing you mentioned right towards the end was like asking for help as well. I think like even from that short conversation that we've had with Gary there, you hear some of the phrases, some of the way he speaks about some of the things he's trying to achieve with players. Straight away, it gets you thinking on the gym side or a movement side that these are the gaps I could potentially fill to support that coach when they're trying to achieve whatever it is with that player. And I think those conversations are key, aren't they? So we talk about the importance of your network all the time. That's a gap that you need plugging within that network. Some high quality technical coaches, because you'll be like me. I can name coaches that if I have a conversation with them over a coffee, I'll just be like a sponge in terms of the stuff that they're speaking about that they want, and then that can be applied elsewhere. And I think having that available to you is just really important, and it ties in with what you said about in terms of the understanding of the game as well, in terms of what you're trying to actually achieve. So no, I thought it was a really good episode, loads of good takeaways from it, but it came at quite a nice time as well, because we've not spoke about the sort of technical side of things too much recently as well.
Yeah, I'd agree. But yeah, final point from me is just that bit that if you are someone who thinks as a sports scientist, again, physical performance coach, that you're going, actually, yeah, I'm not too clued up on how a winger might, cut inside and try and curl it to a corner, how we get those movements going. Go and speak to a coach. Just go and ask. It's really important that we do that and don't become siloed. And I think that's really important.
100%. Well, thank you for your time, Jordan. As always. And just to finish things off, make sure you check out the sponsors, because they massively support the podcast. So that's the Good Prep, Hawking Dynamics, Hytro, and Bridge Athletic. And we will be back again next week for episode 327. See you then, Jordan.
See you soon.